Hey everyone, this is Lynn Bartown, and you are listening to the Apex Hour on KSUU Thunder 91.1. In this show, you get more personal time with the guests who visit Southern Utah University from all over, learning more about their stories and opinions beyond their presentations on stage. We will also give you some new music to listen to and hope to turn you on to some new sounds and new genres. You can find us here every Thursday at 3 p.m. or on the web at scu.edu/apex. But for now, welcome to this week's show here on Thunder 91.1. All right. Well, welcome to this week's show, everyone. How are you doing? This is Lynn Vartan. You're listening to the Apex Hour. You're listening to KSUU Thunder 91.1. Today, we have been talking about Russia and what some people think of as the Siberian tiger, but we'll hear more about what that tiger actually is. I have the author of The Tiger here in the studio with me. Welcome, John Vaillant.
Thank you, Lynn. So good to be here.
Well, it's been great to have you on campus these few days, and I understand that you're doing some traveling in Southern Utah. So welcome to Southern Utah.
Oh, it's been awesome. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to get into talking about the book, but first, can you tell us a little bit about who you are for people who might not know as a writer and some of course, The Tiger, but your other two books as well, and kind of where you're living now and how you came to be from there to here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a journalist and author based now in Vancouver, British Columbia, but born and raised in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I think that's where I learned my love of good writing and grew up with the New Yorker in the house and reading Boston Globe and the New York Times, and always, wanted to do that kind of writing, and was lucky enough to get into the New Yorker a couple of times early on in my career, and I was always interested in adventure stories and particularly in stories about collisions between human ambition and the natural world, and where human plans didn't always go according to the human plan.
Right.
So started out doing that, and then got into deeper, longer projects. In my first book, which is called The Golden Spruce, about a unique tree that was cut down by some people say he was a crazy man, and other people say he was a visionary. That first showed up in the New Yorker, and the New Yorker is a great platform for launching a book, and that's really how it started for me.
Great. Well, The Tiger has been the book that we've been reading on campus, and several of our classes have been reading it. And I know that you've told the synopsis tale a few times, but in your own words, would you tell our audiences, for anybody who might not know, what The Tiger is about?
Sure. The Tiger in the title is a Siberian tiger, the big furry tiger that lives in Russia, that lives in the snow. Locally, they're called Amur tigers after the river that flows through that region of far eastern Russia, which is on the Pacific coast, a long way from Moscow. And it's the only place where those tigers live now. There's about maybe 500 of them left. And they used to live all over eastern Russia and down into China, but they've been killed off. And this story takes place in 1997, a few years after the Berlin Wall came down and communism collapsed across Eastern Europe and Russia. And that led to total economic and social chaos. And one of the results was a lot of people became unemployed in Russia, literally had to live off the forest. So these are people who might have been loggers or miners. Imagine that happening in Utah, and people basically being forced to hunt and fish simply to feed their families.
Right.
And the Chinese border is right there, and there's always been for centuries now a market for tiger parts for traditional Chinese medicine in China. And so Russians started killing their own tigers and selling them to the Chinese. And in this particular case, this particular tiger was wounded by a poacher, and the tiger identified the man who shot him and hunted him down and killed him. And that's really just the beginning of the story. And then it turns into this, basically this really brutal cat and mouse game between hunters and the tiger as the tiger converts to man-eating. And this all really happened in the winter of 1997.
One of the parts in the book that, and you just mentioned it, was this trade for tigers and tiger parts. And I was I think, obliquely aware of that. But to read some of the details about it in your book, and even the tiger farms or parks, could you talk about that aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, so the tiger is an Asian animal. They don't live in Africa. They live only in Asia, and for almost every Asian, whether it's a tribal group, from hundreds or thousands of years ago, or even in contemporary culture, the tiger is a very, very potent animal. And in Asia, that reverence is expressed often in a desire for parts of the tiger. Some people like to have the claws as an amulet. Some people believe the whiskers will give them wisdom or insight or special powers. Some people make soup or wine out of the bones to heal their rheumatism. People like the skins as a status symbol. So this has been in place and been the case for a long, long time. But the tiger population, needless to say, has plummeted over the past century. And now they're across all of Asia, a huge place. There may be 3,000 tigers left in the wild. And so with every tiger that's killed, it really impacts the gene pool and the potential, they grow closer to extinction. So this market now is much more problematic, and people are working hard to change attitudes toward tigers in Asia. And the Russians were actually, because they're really culturally different, they were the first to declare the tiger a protected species in the 1940s. And so, which was a really long time ago for tiger protection. People, still hunt wolves and all kinds of predators, and that was happening all across North America. So Russia was actually quite ahead of its time in that regard.
That's really interesting. And I keep going back to that point where Russia was the first to protect it. And now the relationship is so much more complex. It's just fascinating in that way. Can you describe, you do such a beautiful job in the book, but can you describe the enormity of this animal and just paint us a little bit of a picture of maybe not this tiger, but of these tigers, these types of tigers? Sure.
To give you an idea how different Amur or Siberian tigers are, an early Russian researcher from the 1920s, he thought that the Russian tiger was a throwback to the Pleistocene, to the era of the cave bear and the woolly mammoth.
Wow.
They were so big and so furry and so different. When we think of tigers, we think of India and jungles and these, sleek animals that laze around in the heat. And in Russia, where Amur tigers live, it's 50 below zero in the winter. And they're not like bears. They can't hibernate. They are hunting all winter long, and they don't hunt in packs or groups. So a single tiger has to look out for itself. If it's a female, she might have 4 cubs to feed. So she has to be an incredible hunter and keep her and her cubs alive through minus 40, minus 50 temperatures. And so they're really in another class from all other tigers or really other big cats. And they can also grow to be 500 or 600 pounds.
Yeah.
And they can jump 20 or 30 feet, and they will eat anything if they have to. They live on typically boar or deer, but they will eat anything with protein in it. They'll eat ducks, they'll eat termites, and if they are forced to, they'll eat people. And so they're an extraordinary presence in the forest. And a lot of hunters and people who live in that part of the world just talk about tiger energy, and not in a mystical new agey way, but just the woods vibrate with it when they're nearby.
Yeah. That energy has been talked about a lot in the book, but not just the supernatural energy, but also energy from people who actually had contact with the tigers. Some of the characters and Yuri Trush in the book, who actually had direct contact, then was sort of marked in a way, or almost felt marked, where anytime he was around a tiger from then on, had a very drastic reaction to him. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of it, and which would get into a little more of the mental energy and this idea of how the tigers think, or that kind of thing?
Yeah. So, to begin with, tigers are higher mammals, so they can, they don't have speech, but they have memories and they have strategy, and you have to be smart to be a good hunter. It's very different than being a deer where you just eat leaves or grass. Hunters have to create successful situations or else they starve to death. So they have to read the landscape. They have to understand prey. And the hunters, the human hunters who were doing exactly the same thing in the same forest, pursuing the same game, will often encounter tigers, and they really speak of them as colleagues, not as enemies or competitors, but as fellow hunters. And I had the rare privilege of speaking to a number of people who have been attacked by tigers and lived. And it's just one of the most intense experiences you can imagine, and I was trying to describe it in the book, and it's like being jumped on by a piano, but the piano has a mouthful of, 3-inch fangs and gigantic claws. And, there's all different reasons you might be attacked, but you're never the same afterwards. And not just from the injuries, but from being that close to that kind of sentient but annihilating energy. It's different than being hit by a car. And so in the case of Yuri Trush, who was a warden who was charged with tracking down this injured tiger, he was attacked by that tiger, and he was also then leapt at by another tiger that was behind a fence. But he's just saying to me that it was like the tiger singled me out from a group of other people and threw itself full force at the fence. And even though there was no way it could have gotten through the fence, he was just knocked down by the energy. And Yuri Trush is a tough man, and he has fought off armed men, armed poachers. He's about 6'4". He is, one of the toughest and most principled men I've ever met. And so to hear him talk that way about tiger energy really made me pay attention.
Wow. Tiger energy. That's amazing. I would love to. I think we'll take our first musical break, but that sort of leads me into my next sort of topic that I wanted to get into, which we'll do when we come back. And that's about the relationship between the humans and the tiger in this area, and the things that you discovered about that. But we'll do that when we come back. It's now time for me to play a song for you. I've got a few songs to play for you today. I've been listening to a lot of the South by Southwest artists since that festival happened fairly recently. There's a new release from Apparat, and this is a song called Brandenburg. So yeah, come right back and listen to us after this break of Brandenburg from Apparat here on KSUU Thunder 91.1.
How does it feel if I carry the weight? Fragile consolation, Bermuda tried. First time, every time I feel weak, but I run as fast as I
Okay, well, welcome back to the Apex Hour. That song was Brandenburg, and the band is called Apparat, Apparat. This is the Apex Hour. I'm joined in the studio with author John Vaillant. Welcome back.
Good to be with you.
Well, we were talking over the break about a topic that I know you would like to talk about, and that I find fascinating, and that is the you mentioned collisions and how your writing deals with some of these collisions between humans and animals, but there are other collisions and other different relationships that are taking place in the book. Namely, they're all different populations that are taking place in Russia during the time of this story. There are the poachers, there are the farmers, there are the village people, but there's also a native population as well. Who lived and has lived quite peacefully among the tigers for years. And then this incident happens. I wonder if you could get into that a little bit.
Yeah. So where this all took place was in a very rural area, really in the forest. And the towns were very small, maybe a couple hundred people in each town. And there were native villages and also European Russian villages. And the European Russian attitude toward tigers was quite different than the native attitude. And the native population, needless to say, had been there much longer and had literally grown up, even culturally, with tigers. And unlike in China, the tribal groups in the Russian Far East, the Udage, Nanai, and Orochi, the tiger was a sacred animal to them. And how they expressed their reverence was, you don't kill them. Mm-hmm. And they, just as many native groups here in North America, they had animal ancestors. So for them, the tiger was a relative.
Right.
And shamans might turn into a tiger. Their ancient ancestors might have been tigers. And so they felt a kinship. And they shared the forest with the tiger. I spoke to a lot of native people. They might have encounters with the tiger. When they would meet them, they would talk to them.
Wow.
They knew the forest well enough that they knew where the animal herds were, and if they saw that a tiger was after a particular boar herd, they would give way to the tiger. Say, because they were like fleshed and furred gods, if
right.
you will.
Right.
But the result was they were never attacked. Mm-hmm. Whereas European Russians, came out of a Judeo-Christian heritage. And their sense was, man is the lord of his domain, and nature is there to serve the needs of human beings. And where I think people are familiar with that attitude here in Utah, but that would lead to conflict with tigers, because tigers, they're the ones who think they're masters of their domain. And so it was really a collision between two would-be kings and queens, if you will. The tigers have already staked this place out for millennia. And then these European Russians come in and say, no, we're actually going to run the place now. And they were more prone to attacks and conflicts with tigers. Yeah. And the best integrated European Russians were the ones who had learned from the Udage and Nanai to defer to the tiger. And there was very rarely a problem. But if you were to attack a tiger, confront a tiger, actively compete with the tiger wasn't going to take that lying down.
Mm-hmm. And there was more than just one death. And I think in the book, I remember you mentioning that perhaps if the initial one hadn't had a gun with him, I mean, these smells, these things that are associated with hunting, be it tobacco and gunpowder and all these things, that those smells mean something completely different. And it was very systematic. After Markov was killed, the other deaths were all the same type of person. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
That was a really interesting aspect of this whole case, and it took about 2 weeks for it to come to its ultimate resolution. And during this time, the tiger was hunting, could no longer hunt game, began hunting people. There were a lot of people in the forest. People are hunting for pine cones because there's seeds in them that they need. They're hunting for food. There were men, women, and children in the forest. There were European Russians in the forest, and also native people. This tiger, I don't know, no one knows if it's coincidence or not, but every encounter this tiger had with a human being was with a European Russian armed hunter. And all of those men had loaded weapons, and the tiger confronted each one, which was also unusual because any of us who has a house cat, we know that cats tend to ambush their prey. They'll lie in wait and jump on it from behind, and tigers are no different. So for it to want to confront its prey, in other words, have its prey see it first, especially armed with guns, is very, very unusual. And this animal had been shot before. It knew what guns could do. It's impossible to know if it made the association between the physical object of the gun and the bullet, but the smell would have been there. The smell of the bullet in its flesh and the smell of the gunpowder on the man and on the weapon, they're all about smell. They would have put that together. And so it was quite significant and of great interest to the warden, to Yuri Trush, who was hunting this animal, and to the other hunters, the choice of prey, if you will, that this tiger made when it had a whole menu of people to choose from, and many of whom were unarmed and would have been easier to subdue.
One of the other things that goes hand in hand with this is the state of that particular area in Russia at this time. And I feel that that's also a very important part of it. Russia itself and this particular area in Russia is another character in the story. The everything that happened there, the state of being of the people there, the way that they interact with their environment. I wonder if you could talk about that aspect of it, about the people and about their interaction with the world around them, specifically with those people in those areas.
So under communism, which lasted until 1991 or 1992, everything was centralized and controlled. So any job you had, you were ultimately working for the government. And a lot of the European Russians in that region worked either as professional hunters, trapping for furs, or as professional loggers. When communism collapsed in 1991, all those jobs simply went away. And so you had people who were sort of used to a job and stability. Suddenly they had none. And they were thrown kind of on the mercy of the forest. And because they were already forest people, they knew how to hunt. They knew how to provide for themselves. But there was this sense of being abandoned. And alcoholism is already an epidemic problem in Russian culture. And we've all heard about the vodka and all this. And a lot of that is real. And then to have your government betray you like that, and then to have the most powerful people in the government steal all the money and leave and go to London and other places, it was very, very demoralizing. So there was terrible despair. There's a very high suicide rate there. And so people were really struggling. And, this fellow Markov who shot the tiger and was killed, he had 4 kids. And he was, trying to keep it together. And he had been living off the forest for 5 years already. And that's got to wear on a person, especially when you're, he was a soldier, he was a veteran, he'd had a good job, he'd been a truck driver and a logger, and, he'd lived a life that a lot of us would recognize. And all of a sudden, to have that pulled out from under you, everything becomes very, very precarious, and you would have grief and anger and despair and also real fear. I'm on my own for the rest of my life. It's just me and the forest. And, there are tigers here, there are bears here. That region of the forest is the only place on Earth, that part of Russia, where species of the jungle, tigers and leopards, overlap with grizzly bears, wolves, caribou, and wolverine. It's really an unusual place, but makes it very dynamic.
The characters, Markov, the other villagers, the people who go on to look for the tiger are also wonderfully drawn, from your accounts there. And one character that certainly stands out is Yuri. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about him and his personality and composite character, and because he seems to me to be so unique just in his personal makeup, but also in his position in the story.
Yuri Trush was a warden. He's still alive as far as I know. And he was, because the poaching had grown so rampant post collapse with the trade into China, special squads of former soldiers, armed with heavy weapons, were inserted into the forest to stop tiger poaching. And Yuri Trush, a former veteran, of the Afghan wars and others, was the leader of one of these squads. But what you got to realize is the ordinary citizenry is poaching, and then you have policemen and politicians who are also poaching. And here's Yuri, who's charged with upholding the law in a society that is broken and which has gone basically almost feral. It's just like dogs running deer. And so he would stop people in the forest driving these tank-like vehicles, and there'd be the chief of police in there. They knew who he was. They knew where his wife lived, where his kids lived, where he lived. And these are people who will kill you. Mm-hmm. And he had to make some very difficult decisions in these very remote forest encounters. And in a way, the people were more dangerous than the tigers. And so I saw him like, those compasses on a ship that swivel back and forth, always trying to stay level when everything around them is tossing and turning. And that was the chaos that Yuri Trush had to negotiate.
Yeah.
And then you throw a man-eating tiger into the mix, and, he had a lot to deal with. And how he kept his center and his integrity in the midst of this chaos, when it would have been probably easier for him to poach tigers. He could have probably done it too. He knew where they were, and yet he didn't. And so that honor that he had, and dignity, and tremendous both moral and physical courage, really, really, really impressed me. And Russian wages are nothing. So he did it out of some kind of personal code, and I found nothing and no one to dispute that or diminish that. So it was really a privilege to spend time with him.
I was really touched by his story, and the integrity of how he handled it really came through. It seems that he and many others contributed to some of the takeaways for you, the lessons that you've taken from this story. And I know you mentioned a little bit of that in your talk today, that things like empathy and sensitivity. I wonder if you could talk about some of the lasting lessons that you have gathered from this time that have stayed with you.
Yeah, I mean, I distilled some of those into a TEDx talk that I gave called 10 Lessons from a Tiger. And, one of the things I learned was just simply from speaking to these hunters and speaking to so many tiger biologists, really how much we share with tigers and other apex predators, in terms of the sense of territory, the sense of kind of indignation when people crowd our space, a competitive nature, but also, an ability to adapt and strategize, and the human beings as well. Some of these folks, coming from the United States, you think of tiger poachers, what could be more loathsome except maybe, white slave traffickers or something like that, and yet speaking to these people and realizing, well, they actually had legitimate jobs before their entire society fell apart and they were betrayed. And they're trying to figure out how to make a living. And I think it's similar to how some people find their way into drug dealing in North America. This is not what they want to be doing. It's not what they would want their children to be doing, but they are trying to keep it together during a time of total chaos and breakdown. And so it gave me a lot more compassion, and it made me think about a lot of the judgments that I bring to a situation. And it made, I've sort of tried to hold on to that lesson of withholding judgment and really trying to figure out where a person is. And one of the privileges and rewards of being a writer is, you really get to spend time, a kind of intimate time, listening to people talk about things that really matter to them. And it's a way to really get to know people. And especially in a place as different as Russia, and speaking to, the native people there, who speak a completely different language, have a completely different history, and they talk to tigers. It's very far out. But the more you learn about the way they live, it makes total sense. Mm-hmm. And we talk to our dogs and cats all the time, even though we might not admit it. And to talk to any dairy farmer or rancher, and they know their animals. Yeah. They know how they feel. They care how they feel. Their animals know them. There's a bond there, and it's quite ancient.
Well, it's a great message always, and it's particularly poignant now, I think. So, Well, that's wonderful. It's a time for another song. And so John Vaillant, author of The Tiger, is in the studio with me today. And if you like this interview and want to hear more, you might want to check out our archive for another show that dealt with some animals. And that was with author Susan Casey, who has written about dolphins and sharks and also is an incredible environmental writer. She has a great article on plastic. And we've been talking about that here on campus and in the studio. So if you're interested and like what you're hearing today with John Vaillant talking about the tiger, definitely check out our archive, suu.edu/apex, and check out the podcast with Susan Casey. I think you'll like it. The next song that I have for you is a song by Tamino, and it's WOTH or WOTH. You're listening to the Apex Hour, KSUU Thunder 91.1.
Into my door.
All right. Welcome back to the Apex Hour. This is Lynn Vartan. That song that you're hearing was by Tamino, Tamino, and the song title is Woth, Woth, all separated by periods. I am in the studio with John Vaillant. Welcome back. We're talking about his book, The Tiger, which you can find anywhere you find books. And in fact, there is also an audiobook with his incredible voice reading it. You probably get told all the time that you have a great speaking voice.
Oh, thanks. Well, that's so kind of you.
When I heard that you do the audiobook of when you're reading, I thought, wow, I bet that's a really incredible experience. So if any of you are out there into the audiobook realm, definitely check it out. So anyway, welcome back, John. We've been talking about The Tiger, but also I'd love to spend a little bit of time on your other two books. One is much earlier and one is a little later. So let's start with The Golden Spruce, which is the earlier one. What an amazing story about a tree. And as one of the audience members today talked about, she said she wasn't quite sure about reading a story about a tree, but that she was completely transfixed. So Tell us about The Golden Spruce.
Yeah, it's a tough one. There are not many books written about a single tree.
Indeed.
This tree it no longer stands because it was cut down. It was killed, if you will. Mm-hmm. It was a unique tree on the west coast of Canada. It was a Sitka spruce, which is a huge species, redwood sized. They can have 20-foot trunks and they grow to, 300 feet tall. They're gigantic trees. And this one happen to be golden. And when we think of trees, they're green. And of course they are. And that's where the chlorophyll is. And that's where the photosynthesis takes place. This tree was a freak of nature. And you could fly the entire coast of North America, west coast of North America. And there was only one golden tree, and that was it. And it lived in Haida Gwaii, which is a remote island archipelago off the northern coast of British Columbia. Right near Alaska. And this tree was sacred to the Haida people, an Indian nation that lives out there. It was actually beloved by the loggers who were logging the island for the other big trees, but that one was so strange and beautiful, they didn't mess with it. And then it was cut down by an angry logger who had become really disgusted with the rapacious clear-cutting of the industry. And he knew that tree had been protected by the logging company that was mowing down the rest of the island. And he decided to cut it down as kind of a punishment to the company. And he didn't know that it was sacred to the Haida people. He didn't know that it was beloved by botanists who were trying to solve the puzzle of why it was golden and not green and how it could live, how it could be 165 feet tall with this disability. And then he disappeared under suspicious circumstances. And some people think he was murdered. Some people think he drowned. Some people think he's still alive because he was an incredibly tough man. He had been a timber surveyor and was able to survive in, really rugged mountain conditions all by himself for weeks at a time. So it's another cross-species murder mystery, if you will, not that different from the tiger, just different beings.
Yes, I heard you say earlier that the golden spruce is sort of the tiger is like the golden spruce with stripes. There is this blend, these similarities in the story. I wonder if that, did that hit you after the fact, or did you sort of see that as soon as you started the tiger?
Well, I think all of us, have our own particular interests, and there are just certain things that twang our, enthusiasm, if you will. And as a writer, I'm looking for stories, and so there's certain kinds of stories. But The Golden Spruce was my first book. It was my first big magazine story, and I never thought I'd find another one like it. It's so strange and unique, and then to find the tiger right after that, 2 years after. I feel very, very fortunate to have had, two, what for me are truly stories of a lifetime, and they really made my career, and they were fascinating to research and really a privilege to tell.
Yeah. And then your most recent book is fiction. And I wonder if you could talk about that. And that one is another incredible story told in an incredible way.
Well, the novel, a novel is a work of fiction. Those first two books were works of nonfiction. So that was, reportage, all the facts are verifiable. Fiction, of course, is kind of a different animal, if you will. This book is called The Jaguar's Children. The jaguar is a cat, a big cat that is sacred to many Latin American peoples. And I lived in Oaxaca, Mexico with my family for a year in 2009, 2010. And many, many Oaxaqueños emigrated to the United States to work, some of them legally, some of them illegally. And I met a lot of people who had been smuggled across the border, and sometimes it went bad and sometimes it didn't. And a story came to me about a young man, a young Oaxaqueño man who was being smuggled into the United States from northern Mexico and inside the belly of a water truck. And the truck breaks down in the desert in Arizona, and everyone who's inside there, they're welded inside there, are left to die by the coyotes, the smugglers. And so this story is told in the first person through a cell phone's voice memo feature. Mm-hmm. And so the story is a narration, and that was made into an audiobook too by a wonderful Mexican narrator. Mm. And so it's called The Jaguar's Children, and it's about this guy's experience in that truck, but it's also about what brought him there. So he's telling this story to his injured friend, who's in a coma. And, it's good to talk to people even when they're unconscious because you don't know what they might be hearing. So he's telling it to his friend, but he's also telling it to reassure himself because it's so bleak in there. And through the course of the story, we learn all about Oaxaca, where he's from, all about his relatives, because he's trying to reconnect with his family through storytelling, which is kind of what we do anyway. Mm-hmm. But it's just in this really condensed, intense, dire circumstance.
How was the process of writing fiction? Did you find it enjoyable, more difficult? I mean, talk to me about how that differed for you personally.
It's a totally different experience because while there's a lot of research, to make The Jaguar's Children feel real, I had to know a lot about Mexico and Mexican culture. The voice of Hector, the narrator, and a lot of fiction writers will tell you this. They'll say a voice came into my head and started talking, and that's how it happened to me. Oh. And, I'm a nonfiction guy. I'm super detail-oriented. I'm very fact-based. Everything, the magazines I wrote for were very picky about their fact-checking. And so to write fiction was like being sort of let off the leash, and it was very disorienting in a way. But this voice of Hector was so strong, I can't really explain where it came from.
Wow.
But I was interviewed and reviewed by Mexican nationals and authors, and they said, wow, you really know a lot about the Mexican psyche. How did you learn that? And some of it, Hector taught it to me. And I can't really explain why that is. Some of it may have to do with the fact that earlier generations of my family lived in Mexico and made their lives there. And I don't know if some of that is sort of carried through. We always had a lot of Mexican stuff around the house and people spoke some Spanish. My Spanish isn't that good, but it was a very strange and very different experience.
That sounds like magic. Do you remember the moment that you heard his voice for the first time?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was sitting in my office. We had a little house in Oaxaca. I was still writing The Tiger then. I had to finish The Tiger. So I'm dealing with all the editing details and just the final clerical stuff. And this voice came into my head, which is the first lines of the novel, which is, hello, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need your assistance. And it's Hector trying to make a cell phone call.
That was the first, wow.
I'm sorry to bother you, but I need your assistance.
Did you find yourself asking him questions, or did the conversation I'm just sort of curious.
Yeah, no, it's really, excuse me, it really is kind of a magical experience, but I think a lot of novelists will have shared it. And you just open yourself up to them. And, you'll make these sort of, at the beginning, it's very tenuous because you don't know each other very well. But I know he's stuck in this truck. I know he's trying to get out. I'm trying to figure out who is in there with him. And he's with his buddy Cesar, and I learn more about him. And then I learn, his dad was encouraging him to go north because he was so in despair of the situation in Oaxaca. So I learn a bit about that. And I learned more about his mom. And so slowly this happened, but I actually wrote the whole first draft basically in about 6 weeks.
Wow.
And it's a little bit like being in a trance.
Wow.
It's a really weird experience, and it's a real adventure.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. That was really a special moment to hear about. your next projects, so if you can share, I know you have a great article that I recently read that's from The Guardian about Hellfire, or entitled Hellfire. And I don't know if that's an ongoing issue for you, and if that's something that you're thinking about now, or if you have plans to go back to fiction.
Well, Hellfire was about that terrible car fire. It's called CARR. It's called the car fire, the fire in Redding, California, that killed a number of people, and one among the half dozen hideous fires that hit California. British Columbia also burned really badly. Alberta burned 2 years earlier. And so I'm writing now, working on a nonfiction book about these huge urban fires that are becoming more and more common. And just the dynamics of that kind of energy coming out of the forest into urban areas, people's experience with it. The car fire was unique in that it produced an actual tornado made of fire. So it was an E3 class tornado that was filled with flame. And that's, as far as I know, really never happened on Earth before.
In the article, you talk about how this is something that's never happened before, but we're coming up with a new terminology for it because it's going to keep, it is continuing to happen and is going to keep happening more. Can you talk about that, about the future, about the direness, about what you're seeing in the trends that is leading this to be such an important issue right now?
Yeah, no, the 21st century, is going to be an age of fire, among other things. And, the atmosphere is changing. The heat of the earth is changing. The dryness in the forest is changing. And all of it points toward bigger, more powerful, faster moving fires. And there is a human component to this. The amount of greenhouse gases that humans generate is now big enough to actually affect the chemistry and behavior of our climate. And it's hard to realize. The Earth seems so big, the air seems infinite, but we live in a closed system. And just as you can drive an animal extinct, you can change your atmosphere. And anyone who's been through an inversion in Salt Lake City knows, if no one was driving a car during that 6 weeks inversion, you'd have very different air quality, but it holds it in. And our atmosphere does a version of the same thing. And that is changing the way fire behaves on this planet. And it's going to be a big part of the news cycle and a big part of ordinary citizens' lives going forward, especially people who live in what's called the wildland-urban interface, which is the place where forest and human communities meet. And that's, lots of places like that in Utah, of course, but that's where a lot of people want to live now. You want to live closer to nature, and that's where the fire is.
Right. Well, we will look forward to reading more about that. But if anybody's interested in reading the article now, you can find it online. It's entitled Hellfire, and I believe it was in The Guardian.
Yeah.
So you can definitely check that out. And again, we're here with author John Vaillant, and the books that we've been talking about are The Tiger, The Golden Spruce, and The Jaguar's Children, and then the Hellfire article in The Guardian. So check out all of those things. I'm going to play one more song, and then we're going to come back with our sort of fun every week questions. The last song I have for you is a Japanese group called Yael. And again, this is something that I heard on one of the South by Southwest sort of recaps in learning about. I didn't know this band, but this song is called Tao. And again, this is the band Yael, Yahyal. You're listening to KSUU Thunder 91.1.
Don't you feel you can go through on your own? Some birds are true, some birds are false, but you know you require to stand alone. For more season unknown fate. Don't you feel you can go through on your own? Some birds are true, some birds are false, but you know you require to stand alone.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. This is the Apex Hour with our last few minutes here with author John Vaillant. Welcome back.
Hey there.
So I have my two very favorite questions that I always like to ask. And the first one is just a really funny one. And that is, if you met yourself, or I should say, if you met yourself from 15 years ago in a bar fight today, who would win? So if your person now met you 15 years ago, who would win that fight?
Well, if it really came to that, I like to think we might actually get along with each other. But if we had to go at it, I think the older me might even stand a better chance. I'm in really good shape right now, and I know a lot more than I did 15 years ago. So I think I'd have a psychological advantage, and I'm probably almost as strong as I was then. So I think it would be dangerously close.
That's awesome. So you're voting for you're voting for current you. The wisdom wins, and you're in great shape. So that's awesome. Well, thank you for being willing to answer that silly one. And then my last question is always a favorite, and it is, what's turning you on this week? And this can be anything. It can be a song that you heard, or a book, or a movie, or a podcast, or an article. It's just an opportunity for our listeners to just get a little bit about like what you like to do in your free time and what's turning you on. So, John Vaillant, what's turning you on this week?
What's turning me on this week is Utah. Really. And I've just spent 12 beautiful days between Alta and Escalante and Zion, and been learning about this really interesting and complicated cultural and spiritual situation in this state. The astounding beauty, the tremendous kindness and generosity of people who have guided us and shared, the secrets and jewels of this beautiful place with me and my family. I'm here with my wife and kids. And so, Utah is really turning me on right now, and I really want to come back.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, we're so happy that you had a good time. We'd like to say thank you so much for all the time that you've spent here with us this week. And we're glad that Utah is turning on. So there you heard it, everyone. Utah is a turn on. We know that, those of us who live here, but it's great to hear that from those from afar as well. You've been listening to the Apex Hour. And this week we've had author John Vaillant. We've been talking a lot about his book, The Tiger, which you can find anywhere you find your books or audiobooks. And we'd love for you to check it out. And so we'll sign off for today. That's all the time we have. Thanks. Thanks so much for listening to the Apex Hour here on KSUU Thunder 91.1. Come find us again next Thursday at 3 p.m. for more conversations with the visiting guests at Southern Utah University and new music to discover for your next playlist. And in the meantime, we would love to see you at our events on campus. To find out more, check out suu.edu/apex. Until next week, this is Lynn Vartan saying goodbye from the Apex Hour here on Thunder 91.1.